Hi and welcome to the Sunday Lunch Project podcast, episode 37 for the 30th of November 2019. This is your host, Nigel Creaser, and this month, the Sunday Lunch Project Manager meets Ron Rosenhead, the practical project sponsor guy. But first, a word from our sponsors. So this month is one of my own creations that's sponsoring us again. To celebrate the upcoming Christmas period, I am pleased to announce that I have released my first record. Well, digital EP. I've made a couple of extra versions of the 12 Days of Projects and made them available on the usual streaming services, iTunes, Google, Amazon, Spotify, all of them. Just search for the Sunday Lunch Project Ensemble and have a listen to this questionable piece of art. If you're interested in sponsoring the show, then please get in touch at sundaylunchpmpod@nigelcreaser.com. We've got a few people who might be looking to sponsor next year, so I'm really looking forward to bringing some great partners on board. In news, I mentioned in last month's episode that I was taking part in NaNoWriMo, the National Novel Writing Month, to try and draft up my first novel, or get first 50,000 words as the target with those. I made a great start, really chuffed with the start, but faltered mid-month and then have been drabbing along since. But I'm pretty much on target to be able to hit 20,000 words. I'd like to make 25,000 if I can, but it's looking tight. But I'm pleased with that. I'll continue on pushing through with that, and that should be available sometime next year if things go the way I want to. Part of the reason I faltered was my attendance at the PMI Synergy event. Just interrupted my flow a little bit, but it was well worth it. And a huge congratulations to Chris Field and the crew for running such a great event. I've drafted up a little blog post, which I've got to finish, and then I'll record that and hopefully push it out mid-next month to give you a flavour of what went on at that event. Podcast interviews are coming along well, although I've put a little embargo in December. I'm not going to record any in December to give myself a break. December, next month, we've got Praveen Malik. January, we've got Sidar Oak. And in February, we've got Emily Lundbrecht, M the PM, which I'm sure I've crucified her second name this time. But I've also got a Saturday brunch interview, which I wrapped up this last week with a guy called Paul Bedford, who's a lead cybersecurity business analyst. And he gives us a lot of tips on what we as project managers should be thinking about. I learned a great deal from that. In personal stuff, I've been chugging along with my judo escapades and competed in the British Masters, and also now competed in a local event where I ended up getting a bronze medal and collecting some points for my second Dan, which I was chuffed with. Trying to get ready for Christmas, and that's pretty much it. But I've also been interviewed for a couple of podcasts on two different subjects as well. One to do with my Alexa stuff, which was really interesting with the Codebreak team over in Shrewsbury. And the other was around project management with the PM Tips podcast, which, again, nice to be the other side of the microphone. That's enough for me. Hope to speak to you soon and enjoy the interview. Today, I'd like to welcome Ron Rosenhead to the podcast. Ron has been involved in project management in some way or shape or form for well over 20 years. As CEO of the project agency, Ron provides training, consultancy, coaching, as well as speaking at conferences to individuals, groups, and organizations, covering topics from The Perfect Project, a course which is, nearly 10,000 alumni, has tried and tested practical event, project board briefing, in-depth project management training, benefits realization workshops, advanced skills in project management, and an intensive one-day project management event designed for those new to projects or those who need a refresher. So welcome to the show, Ron.
Thank you very much. Great introduction, Nigel. Very, very much appreciated. Thank you.
That's quite all right. So let's get straight in and dive straight into my questions.
Where were you born?
I'm proud to tell you, and indeed all the listeners, that I'm a Yorkshireman, and you don't get much more prouder than being a Yorkshireman, and probably more stubborn. I originate from the city of Leeds, and I've got to get this bit in because I'm a big Leeds Rhinos fan. It's rugby league. For those who don't fully know what that is, rugby league, look it up. It's a great game. My formative years were spent in Leeds before moving down the road to Sheffield, where I got my first degree, where I studied at the then Sheffield Poly, which is now Sheffield Hallam University, and it was a real watershed for me going off to Sheffield. It was quite an amazing place, so and quite an amazing experience. So my guess is you probably got lots of questions around there, but that's a little bit of from where I'm from, and I go back to Leeds now and again. My mother's still up there, and I miss the Rhinos playing, of course, and my mother. I've got to say that, but it's true. I spoke to her about half an hour ago, and she's incredible.
It's a good job you said that. I'm sure she probably listens to the podcast. You don't want to get caught out not mentioning that. So, if you were born in Leeds, right in the city, or was it in one of the sort of suburbs out?
The suburbs, a place called Moortown, nice and leafy. My late father tracked a route from our house all the way to the Lake District, mostly using paths that were off-road, and there were some obviously that were on-road, and really enjoyable time as kids. Lots of greenery, lots of walking in woods and fields, but yet 20 minutes from the city centre. And it was good. I enjoyed being in Leeds, and in some ways regret not staying there. But then, of course, I wouldn't have met my wife. There we are.
There's pros and cons with everything, isn't there?
Absolutely.
So obviously that really explains why your passion for cricket, as we discussed before we came on air, and that a Yorkshireman who doesn't like cricket isn't really a Yorkshireman, from what I understand.
Well, quite. And I did actually say to my wife when our first child was conceived that I did explain to her the fact that we didn't know the gender. It wasn't the sort of times like it is today where most kids seem to know what the gender of the child or children are going to be. I said, well, look, we may have to, we probably will have to get into the car just before the child is born, so that this child could be born in Yorkshire, so that if it's a boy, it can play for Yorkshire. There was some stern looks from my wife, and I should explain to you and the listeners that my wife is an Arsenal fan, so nice. You probably gather that she wasn't in favour of this, but both were born down here, so there we go. They were
That's I think these what the words the word goes past me, and I can't think what the word is. It's your loyalties to your county can be quite severe with the old cricket side of it.
Well, I think it's more loyalties to the city, if I'm being honest, than Yorkshire. But I am a Yorkshireman through and through. Yeah.
All right. So where do you live now?
I'm now in London, North London. I came down after graduating from Sheffield, and I've been here ever since. And London is just such an amazing place, for good and for bad, by the way. And you get up at sort of 6 o'clock in the morning, and the cars are piled up the road, and there's traffic jams already. But at the same time, I live North London, where there's lots of open spaces, and I suppose that's the second time I've mentioned open spaces, but I like going walking, and particularly I go Nordic walking, in fact, with the poles, and I've been going while the sun is up early. I've been going out early, and it's just absolutely brilliant to walk round and see lots of greenery and the dog walkers, and just the isolation as well, which is fantastic. And it is actually quite a sort of, for me, it's quite a bit of an inspiration thinking wise, and gives me a little bit of space and so on.
All right. So that you mentioned your family then, and earlier on, tell us a bit about them.
Yeah, I married the love of my life, Sue, and We've been married. I daren't tell you how long. Too long. No, definitely not too long. And we're really good together. And we have 2 girls. And it's actually quite interesting because we're grandparents, and that is completely different existence. One of the things that I talk a lot about in project management and specifically training is about roles, the roles that people play. And the role of a grandparent is just so wonderful. I've got 2 children, grandchildren, Ollie, who's 2.5, and Chloe, who's 5 months-ish. We were trying to work out that today.
Okay.
And it's really, really wonderful when we get together with them. Although clearly, when they stay over, we do have some quite sleepless nights. But that's a bit difficult if you've got to get up and you're sort of working the next day. But there you go. That's life. That's a good part of life, actually.
Yeah. It kind of throws you back to when you had your girls, I imagine.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes, you don't want to hear all those stories, but I have to tell you, they're quite amazing ones.
Well, I do find it. I've got 2 girls myself, and we're quite a big gap between the first and second. So obviously that first, the first child where you're absolutely battered and you're completely sleepless and just running on empty. And then they grow up a bit more, and you've kind of gradually gained that back. And when the second one comes along 5 years later, and you're suddenly hit by that shovel again, it is a shock.
Well, it's actually, you're absolutely right, and I think it's that gap when the 5-year gap is nothing compared to obviously when you've got 20 years or whatever it may be for when you become a grandparent, and it's wonderful. It really is wonderful, and I can't really express how I feel sometimes in terms of the creation of life. It's just so fantastic, really wonderful.
Yeah, and the big projects, those ones are. So you mentioned your Nordic walking.
Yeah, absolutely.
My next question is, what do you do when you're not being Ron Rosenhead at project agency?
I'm a husband, and my wife and I like to get out when we can, and I've started to, wherever I can, take Sue with me on different trips. We're going down to Canterbury next month. I'm working in down there. I just come back from a conference, and I took her with me to Athens, and while we were there we went off to one of the islands. I was working in Amsterdam, and we went off there. I was there for 5 days working. So there's Ron the husband and Ron the dad, to 2 girls who we try and see as often as possible. But I like to sort of get out in the garden as well. I've just been out today cutting back some bushes that were incredibly overgrown. They've just shot up in the last couple of weeks. Garden's actually looking very good. We haven't got a big garden, but just to sort of tame it and plant stuff in it. But the other side of it is I've started to learn to relax a bit more. I find when I'm not working and I'm at home, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon in the summer, just get a chair out, just go in the garden, get a book out and read, listen to maybe a bit of music or watch a bit of cricket on the iPad. I will be, for example, tonight and tomorrow night, I'll be watching the rugby league on Sky. I do enjoy rugby league. So there's and I just enjoy reading. I was talking to someone recently about novels, and I was saying that a novel is like a good friend. You just don't want to put it down. You don't want them to go home. And I do really enjoy reading. It's a great passion of mine.
Yeah, I know that feeling with books. I'm a big Terry Pratchett fan, and with him passing away, it was even more exacerbated, that feeling of this book's really good, I don't want it to finish. When I was reading his final book, the last book, was like, oh, I can feel it. It's getting thinner at the end, and you just want to stay with the story sometimes.
Absolutely, and I think the word "their book" is important because I enjoy the physical book rather than the online stuff, the online books and so on. My wife's got a Kindle which she uses, but I find those very cold, and I like the physical book in my hand. It does get a bit difficult when you're you're sherping stuff around the country, and backpacks and briefcases and so on.
Yeah.
And in it, you've got a couple of books, and I do know sometimes that I think to myself, should I get a Kindle? But no, I stick to the books. I do prefer them.
I think it depends on what kind of book I'm consuming and how I hold it in reverence. I think in some ways I've got about the Terry Pratchett, Neil Gaiman, Terry Pratchett's Good Omens book that I reread just before the new series came on Amazon Prime, and it's battered. That book, absolutely battered, and there's something really nice about the feel of that worn out book. And all my hardbacks I've got pristine. The paperback is worn and it's been thumbed and reread, and you don't get that with the Kindle. But then, as you say, I've recently started listening using Audible, and I found that interesting. So I was listening to Dracula. I was on holiday, and it was similar to what you were saying. I was sitting in the sun on a chair, just listening to it, and it did take me away really in a different way, in a similar way to the books do, but with less effort in some ways. But so I'm exploring that. I finding that another new way of reading books, other than just the digital one. And I think it's going to expand as well, because obviously with your Echoes and the Google Home type things coming in, and all the voice stuff I think it's going to explode over time. So you said you grew up in and around Leeds.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when Ron was growing up, did Ron want to be a project manager?
I didn't know what a project manager was. I wanted to be a teacher, and I had a bit of a problem, Nigel. I failed all my exams. I'm not an academic, although I've got 2 degrees now, and I failed all my exams. I was absolutely gutted when I failed all my exams, and I left school and I went to work for, my very first job was a sales job, which lasted 3 weeks. I hated every minute of it. And I moved from there into a chemical company testing dyes, which was an incredibly unhealthy atmosphere. And again, I just didn't like that. And I finished up working for Leeds City Council in the education department, in actual fact. And I spent probably over 16 years in local government. And I just never, I really wanted to be a teacher, and I just never had the opportunity, simply because of I'd failed all my qualifications. However, what the council did with my very first day there, that they said, look, we encourage people to do day release, and they sent me off on a course. And so for now then 3 years I did day release for, sorry, it was probably longer. My memory plays tricks a little bit. Probably about 4 or 5 years, I think it was. I did day release, finishing up with something called the ONC in public administration, which was an absolutely fascinating qualification. Excuse me. And at the time, I was working in student grants department in Leeds, and that encouraged me to do some research. And I actually applied for and was successful and got in to Sheffield Poly, as it was called. And to be honest with you, yeah, the thought of teaching was still in the back of my mind. My sister was a teacher, and she was quite sort of put off by it, particularly the fact that she said there's never any money in it. But when you're young and so on, idealistic, you don't think of that so much. But I actually went off to Sheffield as what was then called a mature student, because I'd worked for 3 years. So I assessed my own grant. There you go. I assessed my own grant. It's in the days of student grants. I assessed my own grant, but I did get it checked. And this was a public administration degree, but I actually think it was a bit of a bad title for it, because it was it was sort of mix of public administration, which in today's Brexit situation would have been fascinating for a politics lecturer. But it was also a huge amount of industrial psychology, which I really enjoyed. and I still use today.
That would have been sort of the organisational theory and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Motivational stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very true, very true. And I people will say something, and I will, memory will come back of circa, first degree, and I'll sort of say, well, look, here's the theory. What's it like in practice, sort of thing, I really enjoyed my time in Sheffield. It was a real turning point in my life for the fact that I was the first person. Well, my sister went off to do a teaching course, but I was the first person in the family to go off and do a degree, and it was just a really, really good experience. Which and I was lucky enough to, once I'd finished, I didn't think about teaching. I just thought to myself, well, what do I want to do? And I went to work back in local government. In actual fact, came down here to London, working for Enfield Council, which is sort of on the northeast, I guess, of London. And I was quite interested in because they sent me off on a training course, but unfortunately I was ill and couldn't complete that. But as part of this, I spoke to the training manager and said, look, I'd really like to find out a little bit about what you do. Is there any chance of spending some time in the training department? And that was the turning point, in actual fact. And I spent 2 weeks, I think it was, with her. And on the back of that, I secured a job as a training officer with Westminster Council, based in Victoria. And I was there for 6 years, and it was just a wonderful experience. I mean, I know a lot of people will knock councils and so on, but I have to tell you, the work that the council did was fascinating. The work that I was doing was quite incredible. I really enjoyed it. Introduced me to change management, but I started off much further back from that. And it introduced me to some of the concepts of project management, which I'll pick up on in a moment. And working at Westminster was, I think, as I just mentioned, just a fantastic experience, because it allowed me to get into all sorts of stuff, which really I want to pick up here, because it's so central to, I think, project management, and it's about people skills. You can have all the systems and processes in the world, and yeah, they're good, they set the background or whatever, but frankly, if you can't relate to people, you can't actually motivate people, then it's a problem. And a classic problem that I hear, I ask each group I'm with, give me one project management problem you would like to solve by the end of this training course, and inevitably I can't get people on board. She won't listen to me. That sort of thing. And that's not a project management issue. It's actually about soft skills. It's about how you can get people to engage, or you can engage with them and persuade them to actually take on board this key change, the organizational change that's actually going to go ahead. And actually, one of the things for me is, I think that's why so many of these organizational wide projects just don't get off the ground. They may finish, but they never actually achieve what they set out to do. And it's because we don't actually relish dealing with the difficult person, the bad conversations or the difficult conversations, and so on. So I hope I haven't really gone overboard there, but it's just a little bit of my passion there.
No, and it's not. It's something I'm hearing quite a lot. Is not quite a lot. I put quite in there for no reason. Mm-hmm. In that we've got the and maybe it kind of leads on to the certification thing. We've got some really good methodologies, some incredibly well researched. You've got the likes of the PMI and APM, where 10s, 20s, 30, 40, 50 years of research and experience and expertise has gone into building those methods and working out what the best way to deliver a project with those toolings. And those methods are fundamental to doing a project, but they're only half the story, aren't they? And that's the point, is that we come into project management thinking, let's go on those courses, let's get sorted with that tick, That's all I need to know. And if, as you say, if you don't take those, what are called soft skills, which I'm stealing this, I can't remember who I stole it from. They're the hard skills, because actually, I'm going to go back to another thing, and people will be bored of this. My view of it is that you can teach someone to use a hammer and a chisel, and you can teach them the best way to use a hammer and chisel, different angle, different things, but you can't. Then they've got to learn how to create the Venus de Milo. Do you know?
Absolutely. Yeah,
and that,
absolutely.
And that soft skill of the creative bit is the hard bit in some ways.
Well, I agree, and I'm wondering whether it was Donnie McNichol who mentioned about the soft skills being the actually hard skills, I just want to come back to certification if I could, because I got a sort of bit of a different view from many people about certification. I want to sort of mention two things really. One, the best project manager I've ever come across was someone who had no qualifications at all. She picked up and ran with one of the very first academy school projects which Project Agency were managing, and she was brilliant. Some of the stuff that she had to deal with, she was just wonderful. And at the end of the project, which was very successful, it was taking a failing school in I won't mention where, but a failing school, and helping to turn it round and virtually rebuild the place and change the curriculum and so on. She rang me and said, "Look, I've been headhunted by what was then the Department for Further Education and Science." And I said, "Well, you go with my blessing, because I think it's brilliant what you've done." And this is a person who had no qualifications at all, but could manage, I think it was a £4.5 million project. My figures are a bit sort of awry at times, possibly, but so it's a very, very large project. Yeah. Well, the second sort of part I want to link into qualifications, certifications is I was recently speaking at a conference in Athens about project sponsorship. One of the questions at the end was an interesting one about should there really be a qualification, a certification for sponsors? I did explain that at one time there was, but I didn't know anybody, or I don't know anyone who's ever taken it. But I actually then went on to say, I think in general that there are too many qualifications for project management, and that really it's a topic in its own right, but really we should be reflecting on, do we need all of these? Because for me, project management is about being practical, which is one of the reasons I failed my qualifications way back when. And I realized that I'm very much a practical person, which is what I try and do on all project management courses. So for me, certification, I have been certified. My Prince 2 has lapsed. I'm a member of APM, that's the Association of Project Management. And I'm interested in following what the professions are doing. But actually, for me, it's much more about the practical outcomes, the outputs that people do, rather than having that bit of paper that says you're a project manager, but actually you can't deliver one.
Yeah, and I think that's the concern, is it? And that's the point, is you can be taught how to use those tools, and you can be taught exactly what those tools are, but you're only part way to be able to deliver a project. And the certifications route is a, as you say, it's a massive topic in itself around value, and I don't think it's just related to our industry either. If you look at other industries as well, there's if the point someone else said to me the other day was, if you've got a lawyer, just because they have passed the bar exam doesn't mean they're a good lawyer.
Absolutely right. Absolutely.
And it doesn't mean that they're ethical. It doesn't mean that they're capable. It doesn't mean that they are going to apply what they've learned very well. And that's the same. That's the same as a driving test. And just because I passed my driving test doesn't mean I'm a very good driver.
No, I agree.
As my wife would tell me regularly. So you moved into the training organisation that you were
Yeah.
discussing before. And when did you become aware of project management when you were in that? Because obviously that was, I'm guessing, was a generic training role that you were in there. Were you delivering different kind?
My job title was HOTS, notice, HOTS, Head of Training Services. And something very strange happened in the course of a week. Someone came to see me and said, "Ron, can you help me? I've got this big piece of work to do." And I said, "Look, we sat down and talked about it. I said, I need to think about this." And I was walking along one of the corridors, and someone said to me, "Oh, can we have a chat?" I said, "Go on, give me a heads up. What's it about?" And he said, "Well, it's sort of almost the same words. I've been given this really big piece of work to do, and I just don't know how to handle it." So I went out and I got to talk to a number of people in the organisation. This was a local authority council. And what I discovered was that people were the senior managers were starting to delegate a lot more, which was interesting in itself, but they were starting to delegate more. And people were given these really big projects. That's the term that we would use now. But in those days, we were given these big tasks to do.
Yeah.
So I got a group of people into a room, and I started to just do a workshop with them. And I called this Work Organisation and Planning. Good title, isn't it?
Yeah, very good.
As a result of that, I mean, it was a brilliant sort of couple of days I had with these people. It was a workshop, so I said I needed to go away and do further research. And I thought, well, I've got to go out and see what's out there. And I came across a qualification called Prompt. Have you heard of Prompt?
No.
It was the predecessor of Prince.
Right.
Now, I hope I've got that right, but it seems to be, I seem to remember it as that.
If you think got a P and an M in it, so it's bound to be.
Yeah. If you think that the Prince 2 manual is thick, then the Prompt manual was I took one look on someone's desk, on someone's shelf, who very proudly showed me these books, which, by the way, I asked and he'd not opened them for 4 years, they were probably a good in old imperial sort of 18 inches thick, several books worth. And I thought, well, that's no good. And these words keep coming back to me. It's about being practical, and I started to put together some really practical work organisation and planning workshops. But it wasn't until, I guess, a little bit later on I realised that what we were doing were projects. And I suddenly saw something as well, which was quite interesting, that I'd moved from outside of local government into the private sector at this point. And I saw that the accountant, the lawyer, the marketeer, the salesperson were all getting involved in projects, but they'd never been trained in project management. I lost my job and made redundant. And I just thought, there's a sort of bit of a gap in the market here. And I started off as a generic trainer with my own business. I think I'd always wanted to have my own business. But then suddenly sort of went with a blank sheet of paper, started to do some planning for myself and the future. And just wrote the words project management on a piece of paper and started to design a project management course, did a little bit of marketing, and believe it or not, picked up a client who stayed with me about 4 years, and then started to pick up more clients. And that's how it all started. That's the genesis, if you like, of where I am now. And it was an interesting sort of start, and it's been a very interesting journey to where I am now.
So with that that training course that you put together there, was it was your organisation, your business's focus on supporting the training, or was it around helping them deliver projects as well?
Yeah, it was mainly to help them deliver the projects, because they were stuck. They were clearly stuck. How on earth do I do this? Don't ask me what the projects were, because I genuinely can't remember. It's just a week or two ago now, yeah, more than a week or two. And I've your introduction said 10,000. I think that's probably up to about. I should have changed the website. It's probably up to about 14 or 15,000 now.
Oh,
but
right.
they were really, really struggling. You know, it's that blank sheet of paper, almost like the author. How do they get going? How do they actually kickstart what is going to be a big change for a business? And they've got no skills at all. And that's not actually totally true, by the way, but they have no skills in the project management field. And what I do is just say, look, you've actually brought some skills with you. Let's just bring it all together and show them a very simple way of actually delivering a way to deliver what they can do. And it works. It works really, really well.
Yeah, I suppose it's interesting that, because in some ways, it's about helping people scale up some innate capabilities. Because if you've got a piece of work, it's just you doing it.
Yes.
Or you and a couple of people doing it in a department, small department. Well, you can just organize it, can't you? You organize the work, you plan out, I'll do this, you do that. These self-organizing teams that we have everywhere these days, that's kind of innate in our ability of just being normal people and getting together and doing teamwork. But then it's a case of how it's the scaling up of that when it becomes harder to do. And that's where I suppose that kind of thing of, right, what tool do I use to plan? I can't use the fag packet now. It's not big enough.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that the scalability issue is so important. And I quote this so many times that on one particular program, I had a couple of people who were at completely different ends of the spectrum. I had a person on the course who was there specifically to help to project manage an away day for, I can't remember the number of people now, but it's going to be in 10 weeks' time. It's going to be off-site. It's a very specific program. She was very new to the world of project management. There was also a woman on the course who was doing a rebuild of part of the site that she was on. It was just over £1 million project. But yet here you've got contrasting people, contrasting sort of projects, not people. One which was going to be over in 10 weeks, one which I think was over in about 14 or 15 months. Cost of the first, the away day, not very much, £6,000. The cost of the second, well over £1 million. And it is about scalability. And I think what was interesting about that course is that the person who was doing the away day could actually see the value in scaling up and scaling down. And I think that for me is and I've quoted this many, many times in actual fact.
It kind of makes sense on that. Is that mix of people's need for project management tooling. And it's across everything, isn't it? It will vary, and you can use most of the principles. It's just choosing, because that's the other thing that I have a little think about sometimes, is around where you will get someone who will take the Prince 2, the PMBOK, the APM PMBOK, one of those, and go, right, let's do all these. And actually, doing all that is not what you need.
Correct.
For painting the living room window. Yeah. It's kind of, and it's that scaling, realizing that it isn't a do that and it'll be successful. It's there's the kit bag. You use the tool you need appropriate to what you're doing, you're trying to deliver.
Yes, absolutely right. And I couldn't agree more with you. I think there is this overemphasis on tools. They're very, very useful. But again, I keep coming back to, it's probably the fourth time I've mentioned it now. It's about being practical. So I'm sorry if I could. So all you listeners who think this guy's practically mad, but it is. I've met so many people who, as you just alluded to there, who are rule bound. The book says, but actually, there's a quicker way of doing it and a more practical way.
Yeah, absolutely. That that was kind of the first project, I'm guessing, from those two guys coming up to you going, or two girls are going, I've got this piece of work. I'm guessing those are the first projects you remember. So I'm assuming there's been many since. And
Absolutely.
I expect through that time you will have seen some huge pieces of work that have gone well, some small pieces of work that have gone badly. What would you say would have seen as being a biggest mess up that you saw, and maybe the PM or you learnt looking in on that biggest screw up, as I term it?
Yeah, I think I was working with a one-man PMO, so a top 100 company here in the UK, quoted on the stock exchange, British Stock Exchange. And I was trying to coach this guy in a number of different areas. And the guy said to me very quietly in this open plan office, "You see that group over there?" And he pointed. And behind a glass partition, there were probably 10 people. And he said, yeah. And I should tell you, this was a Thursday. He said, it's got a significance I can explain in a moment, or I will explain in a moment. He said, I've just discovered that they're managing the desktop project. And I said, okay. And he said, they are going to change the desktop for this company globally. They employ thousands and thousands of people all over the world. And I said, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds quite a big piece of work. He said, it is. He said, I've just found out about it. And I've asked some people whether they know what they know about it, and they don't seem to know very much. And here's the killer. It goes live this weekend. And I sort of sat there and I had this image of someone who'd written a 20-page report on whatever it was on Friday, finishing it and saying, I'll finish that off on Monday, putting it on their desktop and coming back on Monday. And of course, the desktop is changed. And he said to me, we're not talking about some small project here. The cost of doing this was huge because it was linked into a communication strategy that the business was trying to put in place as well, so that people could be updated on a more regular basis globally. And it was just, he was when he started to explain to me, I could see with his body language that he was struggling to contain himself. And that was actually my last meeting with him. But we had various telephone conversations afterwards where he told me disaster after disaster, and the project team were abandoned, and the desktop was still there, but people still couldn't find, say, that report or the information that was on their desktop. And they had done no stakeholder engagement at all. They'd done no stakeholder analysis. They just said, right, we'll do it. And they did it, and they did it very successfully, except they didn't engage with people. And I just feel, that is just so typical of what I've seen over the years of people not engaging with the rest of the, global community. In this case, we're talking, well into 5 figures worth of staff all over the world, different countries and different time zones, obviously.
Crazy.
And, it was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster. I mean, there's been tons of things like that, and I think that for me stands out as the sort of main one. But the saddest thing is I lost contact with this guy because he went to work abroad probably 9 months after, and as a project manager, and I never sort of heard the end of it, other than it was just chaos. The whole business was in chaos.
Jeez, I think, and that goes to one of your points earlier around sponsorship, because there would have been a senior leader sponsoring that change within that organization, and as part of that sponsor's role, they should be going, you let everyone know. I've not seen any comms on this.
Yeah,
there's everybody in this organization, me being the sponsor, whose bits are on the block if it doesn't go wrong.
Absolutely.
They've kind of palmed it off and gone, right, you do that. They'll do the stuff they need to. They've got their 18-inch tomes of project books.
Absolutely right. Absolutely, yeah. And in fact, I'd go further, because I think that in the sponsor training that I do, and indeed at this conference that I mentioned, the sponsor has got a role to play in communicating the key changes that are going on in the business.
Yeah.
And actually, I never knew who the sponsor was. I didn't know who this project team were. But it was just such a failure, and it was a failure because it was such a big project. It was a global project. I mean, even within a company that's self-contained, and you just change the desktop without it telling anybody. Wow, incredible.
Yeah, sounds crazy. Crazy. So let's flip it on its head, shall we, and talk maybe about something that's a little bit more on a positive side. What have you seen as being the greatest, not the greatest, really good examples of project leadership, and maybe if there's any points where you've had a proudest moment where you've been involved in helping that happen?
Yeah, I always find this one a bit difficult, because part of the problem with the role that I play is maybe I'll go in, I'll do 2 days here and go off and so on, but
so let's thinking about that.
Okay. I can give you one. It's okay, because one of the strange things that happened to me was, I mentioned my liking for books, and one weekend I was at my local library, and there's a very small car park, and there was a people mover in there, and a guy surrounded by about 4 or 5 kids, and he was trying to get them into this vehicle, and as he turned round, he saw me and he said, "Hello, Ron." And it turned out he'd been on one of my courses. I didn't recognise him at all, and this is part of the problem sometimes. People come up to me and say, "Hello, how are you?" Happened the other day, actually, and it was been someone who I'd been run a course for, and I didn't recognise them. It was out of context. And he said, "Yeah." He said, I was on that course. Don't you remember?" And actually, I do remember. It was, I came home and I said to my wife, she asked me, "How was the course?" I said, "Well, let's put it this way: our bank manager's happy." And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, we're going to get paid for it, but actually, I really query the value to anybody that was there." Well, how wrong I was, because this guy told me, and I'll be brief with this, that as a result of, I encourage people to go back and talk to their managers, and this is one guy who did, and to talk to the managers about the course and what we did and the learning from their point of view. And what he said was that he found it really useful, and a couple of things that he pointed out. So he said, "Right, what I'd like you to do is to organise an away day, and let's get together with the team." I can't remember how many was in the team now. And what the first thing that they did was they did and identified all the projects, and there were quite a number of them. And they then said, "Well, let's look at who's sponsoring these. Let's look at who the project managers are and who the project teams are." And actually, as a result of that, firstly realised that there were too many projects that they were doing, so they decided to start to look at priorities. Now, I'm sort of encapsulating a day, then plus a further half a day in a sort of very brief period here, and they reduced their projects that they were going to be delivering, which meant that they could spread their resources out onto the key strategy, change projects that they needed to deliver. And as a result of which, I therefore got more demands for training, because some of these people had never been on project management courses. And actually, that department was held up to be a beacon of effectiveness within the business because of the way that they deliver their projects. So I was really chuffed about that, because my bank manager was even more happy because we got more work from it. But I think the bottom line for me was that it just shows how wrong I was, that something that I'd come away with feeling quite despondent about. This guy was quite bubbly and bouncy, and he said, "Yeah, it was really great." And I came back and told my wife, and she said, "Well, that's really good. That's more power to you." And that's, for me, is just one of the proud moments that I can particularly remember, and really one of the real successes, I think, because that then spurned the organisation onto bigger things. And that was the first organisation I ever did any sponsor training with, in actual fact. Although they didn't take it very far, but I did probably 3 or 4 programs. It's a huge organisation specifically for sponsors, and that sort of kindled my interest in that particular area.
Brilliant. So it's that that thing that you drop a pebble in the little calm pool, and then you don't actually see the ripples coming back until later, do you?
No, absolutely right, absolutely. And it was only because this guy turned around and said, "Hello, Ron, how are you?" That I realised all this.
That's brilliant. So, and I drill down a little bit into that. Isn't in the roles that you do, and you tend to do that? Is it quite? I imagine it's quite difficult where you're stepping into an organisation, kind of either understanding what their needs are for training, giving them the training, getting a bit of understanding about their organisation, but not seeing that outcome necessarily, and except for those instances. How does that kind of how do you kind of deal with that? Because you're kind of pushing them off into the distance, going, "There, I've taught you how to do that now." How does that make you feel?
It's difficult because I'd really like to follow up with everybody, but it is an interesting one, and I sat down and pondered this one because one of the problems that I've got is that you mentioned the 1-day course, the 2-day course, whatever length the course is. There are some people who need, and I don't mean this in any derogatory terms, they need hand-holding. And I've been trying to convince clients for years of the need for coaching of their project managers, and that we would do the coaching, or frankly they should do it internally, which would be better. And clients don't see the need for this, because you're taking something that as a concept that's quite new, you're taking change as a concept, which again for some people is difficult. Well, we all know it's very difficult, and yet they've done 2 days, so you're skilled. And I'll never forget, I have to tell you this, that when I was a general trainer, I did a business letter writing course, and a guy came up to me in one of the corridors and said, "You know that business letter writing course that you did? It was useless." Words to that effect, I can't remember exactly. And I was sort of a bit taken aback, and I said, "Well, why is that?" Ushering him into sort of a side room where we could talk, and we got sat down, and he said, "Well, so and so still can't write letters." And I said, I said, that's sad. I said, "But what have you done to help and support this person?" "Well, nothing. You've been on a 1-day. Nothing. We didn't been on a 1-day course, but they can do it." And I said, "It doesn't quite work that way." And he said, "Well, he doesn't write very well. He doesn't spell very well." So I said, "So let's be clear." I said, "You're expecting 1 day's worth of training internally to right potentially the wrongs of the educational system that this person's been through if they can't write very well and spell very well." And I said, "Come on, give me an answer." And in actual fact, it was quite a challenge for this person. And they went away and sort of came back, and we had several discussions, and he eventually took it on board that he needed to do some coaching, but never did. And I think that we should be doing more coaching as consultants, not just project agency. I do think we should be trying to sell the concept of coaching. Frankly, whether we do it or they do it, I don't. The internal people do it, I don't care. So leaving an organisation behind sometimes is actually very difficult.
Yeah.
But then I don't have their problems. I can walk away from it. That's the beauty of the job, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's also the stress of the job, because you can see where they're going to fail. You can actually see where they're going to fail, and there have been the odd occasion where I've actually had to say to organisations, "Look," and in fact, there's one particular organisation. I just said to them, "You're spending all this money with us. It's not working. You really need to sit down and because we were there every 2 weeks. We'd been there, and I just said to this director, you've got to check out the value that this is to your organisation." He was taken aback and called me into a meeting, and the result was that we didn't actually do any more work, but they started to reappraise where they were going and the direction. He was very grateful to me. Our bank manager wasn't, but there you go. But I think we've all got to live with ourselves the next day and look in the mirror. And ethically, I thought it was the right thing, and I still think it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think, and like you say, if you can step away from that, there are. I have a friend who has a marketing company, and their basis is this is how they do it, and this is what they think about it. And if someone comes to them and says, right, no, I just want you to do this, 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 and this for me, I don't want all that other stuff. He says, well, there's plenty of people who can do that for you, but I'm not going to do that because there's a certain approach and what he knows works from his opinion, and he does it that way.
Yes.
And that strength of your convictions is really valuable, I think, and kind of sometimes sitting there going, actually, no, not anymore. Sorry, I'm not going to just do that, because you kind of strive for excellence rather than just for mediocrity, don't you? So, but one thing did pique my interest there, as you were saying, you go there, you have all the joys of training people and seeing people light up as they realize stuff, and then step back when potentially they have the problems. It's kind of like being a grandparent, isn't
it? Yeah. I think it's more about being a parent, actually, because talking with other grandparents recently, someone said, look, we've got to let go. We've got to let go of our kids.
Yeah.
And
I'm terrified of having to do that with my 12.
Yeah, and I guess I have to learn to let go of particular courses and particular people on the course, because there's so many of them. I mean, the conference in I mentioned it 4 or 5 times now in Athens. I spoke to a lot of people, around 120 people there. I didn't speak to everybody. You can't take on the woes of the world. And one of my many bosses, this guy called Jeff Davis, he said, look, all we can do is throw seeds. Some of them will grow.
Yeah.
That's a crude sort of expression, but I think,
but as you say, that guy who you thought you'd thrown on barren ground and came back with an absolute transformation there, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Fantastic. So onto my list again. Back on the schedule and back onto the following the process to its end. You've got your website. I've seen on there with a number of different bits and bobs and project agency and a number of blog posts on there. You obviously started doing that kind of stuff. What made you using that approach and doing it that way, really?
I think excuse my voice. I think that it's part of the sort of strategy. What am I? What's my role? And one of my roles is, I believe, I'm an educator. Back to being a teacher. I'm an educator, and I felt this for quite a long time, and hence speaking at conferences and so on. And one of the things that I decided to do was, if I'm a teacher, I needed to sort of reach a wider audience, and the blogging was part of that. And it was, I have to be honest, very difficult at first, getting going. But I think, it became relatively easy. And although my last real blog was actually over a year ago, it actually, a lot of the stuff that came out was as a result of things that came out on courses or conversations that I'd had with potential clients or actual clients. And I felt that, a wider audience would actually benefit. So there's something like between 400 to 500 blogs on there. I think it's actually just over 500 now. And I thought that it was time to give it a rest. And I don't push the blog very much. But I did actually, my last one I do want to mention, because it's actually a spoof blog, which was written on May the 9th, 2018, in big, large letters, official. Project sponsors. Project sponsorship has been declared null and void.
Yeah, I can see that one right in front of me.
Yeah, I'm going to read the first paragraph, because I think it's sometimes it's the creative mind. At a meeting of the International Project Management Convocation (brackets IPRO MCO) close brackets this month, the board ruled that there was no need for projects to have a project sponsor. Now, there's no such organisation called the International Project Management Convocation, and there was no ruling. But I wrote that more out of a frustration, I guess, because organisations just don't seem to see the value of project management. And I had some interesting sort of responses at the bottom there. But I also, just to come back to the general question, just want to underline the fact that I think it's about project management education. And bluntly, it's a marketing tool as well. I can say to people, look, on a course, I've written this blog, or I've had business from it. I know directly from blogs, and I've had controversy from it. With people saying, "Ron, I violently disagree with you," and so on. Well, fine, if that's what people have got, and I will always argue my case. And by the way, I'm not always right. It's Ron Rosenhead's view.
Yeah, and I think you're right there that you can, and that's the wonder of the internet, isn't it? Is we can
absolutely
viciously disagree with each other, or happily disagree with each other.
Yeah, as long as it's done in a way that's acceptable. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no problem with that.
So, talking about blogs, what was the last few questions I've got here? Really, I'm coming up to. What was the last project blog that you read that wasn't your own?
Oh, blimey. Well, in actual fact, I do read an enormous number of blogs, and I genuinely can't remember because I read so many of them. This is a terrible sort of thing to say, really, but I do read an enormous amount, but I can't remember specifically who wrote it and so on. And sometimes I will read, endless number of blogs, but I don't actually get anything from them, and I've sort of cut off halfway through and so on, because I've been doing this for a long time now, and I don't want to read the same stuff. I want to read new and challenging stuff, and there's lots out there. Don't please ask me to remind you though which one it is, because I'm failing miserably with this question, and I feel desperately disappointed in myself for it.
Don't worry about it. So final two questions, and these ones I always ask everyone.
Okay.
If you and I'm guessing you've got lots here, but if we could choose one top tip that you would give to not someone who's come along to one of your courses as a new, but something that they're a seasoned project manager. They've been in the battle with numerous different types of projects and types of persons.
Yeah.
What's the one tip you'd give them?
It's 1.5 maybe, but anyway.
That's fine.
Being on a desert
I'm flexible.
On a desert island disc, would let me take nine records. But I guess the first thing is it's be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Be yourself, because I know a lot of project managers get incredibly stressed and challenged by the work that they do, and it often leads them this is not my words, but several project managers have said to me, illogical ways of working and so on, which is obviously not very good. But linked to that is actually remember the people side. And for me, the people side is about self as much as others, because I've seen project managers who have worked themselves into the ground 7 days a week and working, Saturdays and Sundays, extensive long hours and so on. And I think that they've not stood up for themselves and been assertive, and actually in the scoping side of it said, look, if we're going to do this project properly, we need I'm going to create this. We need 4 people full time on this project. You're giving me 2 people full time. This is a massive risk to the project. I don't think it's going to be successful to achieve what we're setting out to do. And I think that that's putting your head above the parapet, being professional, but you're thinking of yourself as well, because I know that a lot of people do burn themselves out, and which I find very, very sad.
Yeah, and actually, from an organisational point of view, if someone does do that, it doesn't help the organisation either, because they end up with a half-finished project with a project manager with a massive amount of invested knowledge and goodwill built with the team, and they're off sick. And then, you know what I mean? It kind of, and invariably the project will end up being delivered in the same sort of window that it would be when the project manager comes back and says, well, if we've only got that capability, we're going to have to stretch it out.
Yeah,
and it can't right. self-fulfilling prophecies sometimes, aren't they?
Yeah.
So my final question, and I'll twist it around a little bit. So, because you're not quite on the standard flow for my
okay.
interviews, which is fine.
Yeah. As Yorkshire people normally aren't, by the way.
My dad was from Scarborough, so yeah.
Okay.
There you go. What would you tell the younger Ron on that first day when you'd realised you were in that project management, whether it was probably when you were starting that workshop and you had those two guys setting up the work organisation and planning workshop? What would you say to you there if you'd bumped into you in the corridor at the same time?
You just said it's the final question. Well, it's the word question that I want to pick up here. It's actually keep asking questions. I'm renowned for asking questions. I went to a meeting recently and someone said, "You ask a lot of questions, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, because if you don't actually understand what it is you're supposed to be doing, you're never going to be successful. And I've been astounded over my life how people just sit back and listen, and what's been given to them is inadequate. People need to dig deeper. And it's just about going out and asking questions. Intelligent questions, dumb questions, tough questions, any type of questions. Learn really good listening skills along with really good questioning skills. I think I've extended that to maybe 1.5 again, Nigel. Sorry.
Not a problem.
But learn to listen and learn the way to ask good questions. Incidentally, I did have a project manager on a course who said to me, my team came up to me and said, I wasn't a very good listener. This was during a listening exercise when people were querying the value of it. So I think, that said a lot for him, which was very brave, and I think for project managers generally. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So thank you very much for your time on the call, Ron. It's been really, really entertaining and really interesting.
Yeah, pleasure.
If people want to get hold of you, if they want to find out what you're doing, get involved with your courses, read your blog items, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
They can call me on the mobile, which will be. Am I allowed to give a number out here?
Absolutely fine.
Yeah, 07973 735 078. If I'm not around, just leave a message and I'll get back in the usual way. Or just send an email, and email is rr@projectagency.com. That's Romeo @projectagency.com. And I'd be delighted to hear of anybody who wants to chat or wants some information.
Fantastic. And all it is to say, thank you again, Ron, and have an absolutely wonderful evening.
No problem. Thank you very much indeed for the invitation, and thank you all for listening. Cheers.
Cheers, Ron. Cheers now. Right, I'll just work out how to stop it recording.
Many thanks to Ron for a great, interesting interview. If you know of anyone that is interested in being interviewed for the podcast, please get them to get in touch at Sunday Lunch PM pod at nigelcreaser.com. If you've got any comments, questions, same address, or catch me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram with the handle Sunday Lunch PM. And if you'd like to support the show, you can in many ways. As I mentioned earlier, have some sponsors potentially and some sponsor opportunities. But the easiest way is just share it with your friends and colleagues, please. That'd be fantastic. Next easiest, craft yourself a 5-star review or 4-star, 3-star, maybe 2. I'd be very grumpy, but if that's what it is, that's what it is. You can grab a free copy of When I Were a Project Manager, or a copy of Project Management, The Sketches. Finally, there's Patreon. Jump into there and you can provide us with some support that way, and you'll get a shout out on the show. But more importantly, have a listen to the show again when we come out with the next episodes. I've got some fantastic guests coming up. So that's all for me to say is remember, #project management is funny.
Well, it's goodbye from me, Nigel Creaser, and it's goodbye from him, the Sunday Lunch PM. Goodbye.